The airport was bustling with activity, but beneath the hum of rolling luggage and overhead announcements, a predator lurked in plain sight, his uniform just another layer of his deception. Mark had the power to strip away a passenger's privacy, but it wasn't security he was after, it was something far darker. Emily had no idea that, as she walked through the checkpoint, her journey was about to take a terrifying turn. This is where the story started. The airport was a flurry of movement, a constant hum of rolling luggage, announcements overhead, and travelers hurrying toward their gates. Among the busy crowd, Mark, a mid-30s airport security worker, stood at the scanner, his eyes darting across the sea of passengers. He had worked at the airport for years, but recently, a dark shift had begun to take place. Mark had started noticing how many female travelers passed through his checkpoint, alone, vulnerable, unaware of the dark intentions lurking behind his routine security checks. From his vantage point, he spotted Emily, a woman in her mid-20s, looking flustered as she juggled her carry-on bag and a drink. She was one of many to pass through the checkpoint, but Mark's gaze lingered. His eyes scanned her as if sizing her up. As Emily approached, Mark stepped forward and blocked her path. His hand moved out, signaling for her to stop. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to do an extra check on your bag," Mark said, his voice flat, his eyes giving nothing away. "We've had reports of illegal items being smuggled in this area. Please follow me." Emily hesitated, the tension in her chest tightening as her stomach churned with a mix of confusion and unease. "What? Is there something wrong with my bag?" she asked, trying to stay calm. "I'm just visiting my family." "It's standard protocol," Mark insisted, his tone becoming more insistent. "Please come with me to a private room. It won't take long." Emily was taken aback. It felt too much. But there was little choice in the matter, she was a passenger, and Mark was an authority figure. After a brief moment of hesitation, she nodded and followed him down a quiet hallway. At the same time, Sara, another security officer, had been working her shift when she noticed something strange. She had always found Mark's behavior to be somewhat odd, especially his tendency to pull female travelers aside for extra checks. It had become a pattern. A subtle, almost imperceptible one, but it was there. Sara's instincts told her something wasn't right. She watched Mark take Emily into the private room, and she felt a sudden, gnawing sense of dread. "Have you noticed Mark's behavior?" Sara whispered to a colleague, her eyes flickering toward the hallway where Mark had just disappeared with Emily. "I've heard rumors," the fellow officer replied, glancing in Mark's direction. "But nothing solid." "You think he's targeting women?" "I'm going to keep an eye on him," Sara said, a note of resolve in her voice. "Something's wrong." Sara made her way to the security room, where the monitors displayed live feeds from various areas of the airport. Her stomach dropped as she watched Mark and Emily enter the private inspection room, only to be taken aback when she noticed the cameras inside the room were down. Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content. Inside the room, the atmosphere was charged with tension. The door clicked shut behind them, and the only sound was the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Emily sat on the chair as Mark moved closer to her, his eyes scanning her every move. He didn't seem to notice the unease growing in her expression as she nervously shifted in her seat. "Please, just check my bag," Emily said, her voice wavering. "I really don't think this is necessary." Mark ignored her protest and moved to the door, locking it behind him. He turned and smiled with a chilling sense of authority. "It's just a precaution," Mark said, his voice smooth and calculated. "I'm going to have to perform a thorough check, ma'am. I'd suggest you cooperate." Emily swallowed hard, the situation growing more surreal with each passing second. He wasn't just checking her bag, he was inspecting her, her body, her clothes. His eyes didn't leave her for a second, and that's when she realized the terrifying truth: this wasn't about security. It was about something much darker. "If you don't comply, I'll have no choice but to report you," Mark continued, stepping closer. "It could delay your flight." Do you really want that? Emily's face paled. She had no idea what to do. She felt cornered, vulnerable, every instinct told her to scream, to run. But there was nothing she could do without risking her travel plans. Meanwhile, Sarah's growing suspicion had pushed her to take action. She dialed Detective Harris from the police department, her voice urgent as she spoke into the phone. Detective, I think Mark's been targeting women. He's pulling them into private rooms for these illegal, unnecessary searches, Sara said, her voice tense. I've realized we don't have any footage from inside that private room. Who knows what's happening in there between him and the female traveler? We need to step in before things escalate. Detective Harris's voice came through the phone, calm but firm. Sara, we need concrete proof. We can't act on suspicion alone. We'll send someone undercover. You stay on him. The next day, Sara met with Detective Harris in the security office, ready to take action. They had noticed a troubling pattern. The camera feeds from the private room always cut off whenever Mark entered with a female traveler. It was clear that something was happening behind closed doors, and they needed concrete evidence. Detective Harris gave the plan. We need to set up hidden cameras in the room, but we'll have to do it early enough to catch him in the act. An experienced undercover officer named Megan was chosen for the mission. Calm, composed, and fully prepared, Megan would pose as a vulnerable traveler. Sara, you'll be monitoring everything from the control room. We'll be keeping a close eye on the situation, Detective Harris said, giving final instructions. Megan, just act like you belong, don't let anything slip. Megan nodded, adjusting her bag, and made her way to the checkpoint, ready to carry out the plan. Megan walked through the security line, her steps deliberate but casual. She glanced around the airport, pretending to check her phone as she approached Mark's station. The moment their eyes met, she knew Mark had already picked her out. He watched her closely, assessing her with the same intensity as he had done with so many others. Ma'am, I need to perform an extra search, Mark said, his voice flat but demanding. Please follow me. Megan's heart skipped a beat, but she feigned confusion, playing into the act. What's going on? Megan asked, her tone carefully controlled. I've never had this before. Are you sure? It's just routine, Mark replied with a cold smile. We've had some issues recently. Don't worry, it won't take long. Megan followed him down the hallway, her eyes flicking to the security camera above. She knew this was the moment, everything hinged on her performance. Inside the room, Mark began his usual routine. As he started asking Megan to remove her shoes and jacket, his behavior became increasingly invasive. He leaned in too close, scrutinizing her body language as if there was more than just a security check happening. Megan stayed composed, keeping her emotions in check. Are you sure this is necessary? Megan asked, her voice wavering just enough to sound believable. I feel uncomfortable. Mark's smile tightened. We do things thoroughly here, he said, his voice oozing control. Don't worry. Just cooperate. Now. Go ahead and undress for me, he said, his voice a low purr. I love this part where I give the women a chance to showcase their beauty. What do you mean? Megan asked, her voice barely a whisper. The words felt thick and clumsy in her mouth. Well, Mark chuckled, a sound that scraped against Megan's nerves. I chose who comes into this room with me every single day. I ask them to do the same, and if they don't, they will miss their flight, and you know what? They comply. Simply because no one wants to lose their money and flight. He bragged, the words dripping with a sickening arrogance. Megan swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. I don't feel comfortable. I cannot do this. Mark's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed, the amusement replaced by a chilling menace. Then I will do it for you. I'll undress you. He stood, his shadow looming over her, and Megan knew, with a terrifying certainty, that this wasn't a negotiation. But just as Mark took a step closer, the door slammed open, and a voice rang out. "Mark, step away from the suspect," said Detective Harris, his voice firm and commanding. "You're under arrest for unlawful search and harassment." Mark froze, his eyes widening in shock. He turned to Megan, and for the first time, he saw the badge clipped to her belt. His stomach dropped as the reality hit him. Sara stepped forward, her expression cold. "You're done, Mark. You're not above the law." As Mark was cuffed and escorted out of the room, his world crumbled. The shock on his face was palpable, but there was no escaping the truth. Later, in the quiet of the airport, Megan stood beside Sara, watching as Mark was led away by officers. "Thank you," Megan said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without your help." Sara smiled, relief washing over her. "You were amazing. It's over now. We've stopped him." As the officers cleared the scene, the airport slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The tension had lifted, and though the shadows of Mark's actions would linger for a while, justice had been served. After Mark's arrest, his life quickly unraveled. The airport conducted an immediate internal investigation, during which several victims came forward with similar accounts of his inappropriate behavior. Mark was swiftly terminated from his position, losing his job and any professional reputation he had left. His arrest became a public matter, and he was arraigned in court on charges of unlawful detention, harassment, and violation of privacy. The court proceedings were widely covered in the local news, with many passengers expressing outrage over his actions. Mark was eventually found guilty of multiple counts of unlawful search and abuse of power, leading to a prison sentence. His conviction served as a stark reminder of the severe consequences of abusing authority, especially in a position that people trusted for their safety. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to help our channel grow.